The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Hello? Good morning, everybody. Sorry about that delay. We had a few technical difficulties on our end. As technology, we love it, but it does mess up here and there. But welcome to Gerasi University's online workshop. Today we will be presenting on common pitfalls to avoid wall foreclosing. This presentation is going to be brought to you today by Paul Sievers and by Dan Lamel from Foreclosing Equity Group. So now I'm going to hand it over to Paul and Dan to begin this session. Thank you.
Good morning, everybody. How are you? I hope everybody's fine. Let's see. We are today joined by Dan Lamel of Foreclosing Equity Group. I'm Paul Sievers, the litigation team leader at Gerasi Law Firm, and we're going to talk about when to foreclose, what to consider while foreclosing, and how to avoid litigation arising out of your foreclosure. And I'll start off, and Dan, feel free to jump in at any time. The primary concept that Dan and I want to get across to you today is that generally a lawsuit, if you're unfortunate enough to get in one, is won or lost at underwriting. And I have on the slide what I consider to be a pretty good sub-point here, which is if the deal looks too good, it probably is. So in making your loans and considering what loans to make, if everything looks like it's a perfect loan, that's the time where you want to stop and really take a longer look at things and decide how you want to proceed. A couple of things, Dan, why don't you go through a couple of things that you consider in deciding whether or not to make a loan and when you're really looking at a borrower saying, hey, this doesn't look right to me.
Yeah, so typically we spend a lot of time on the front end vetting the borrowers, and we've got a I guess smell test that we run borrowers through. One of them is we want to see the history in the lending business. You know, what have they done previous to this transaction? That's one of the things we look at. We also focus a lot on cash flow, and we do a background search typically through you guys. Most of the transactional documents are run by Gerasi Law Firm. So we also do, if it's warranted, we do a background search on these borrowers. But predominantly, we spend a lot of time speaking to the borrower, asking them the hard questions, challenging them on things that usually would trip up an average person. And that usually flushes out people who we don't want to lend money to. Beyond that, it gets a little bit more complicated, but on the surface, we spend a lot of time on that on the front end.
Now, Dan, I know that at least on you and I have dealt with kind of one loan in particular where you had made a comment to me that the borrower, that the broker who was handling the loan had shopped the loan around and you weren't aware of that. Is that a common question you ask of brokers who are bringing you loans?
It is. If the borrower didn't come direct, that's one of the, if it's a brokered transaction, yes, we not only ask where it's been, but did they sign any contracts? We've found historically that borrowers don't always offer up the truth, especially when there's a broker-to-broker transaction. So we spend as much time not only asking those questions, but then also doing our own research. It's a small community. We know most of the peers in our business, so we tend to share information that way as well. So that's another avenue that we go down if we know that a property or borrower has been searching for financing.
One point that I have on the thanks, Dan. One point I've got on the slide here is the question of where are you going to be litigating, and what I mean by that is where the property is located. In California and most states, jurisdictions differ in terms of how receptive they are to lenders and borrowers. For example, if someone comes to me with a loan, a lender comes to me with a loan, and the property's on the west side of Los Angeles, that's a red flag for me, because unless the loan is a really good loan, if anything goes wrong, you're going to be in Santa Monica, which is notoriously hostile to lenders. So again, each state has different jurisdictions with different reputations. So if you have any questions, it's good to talk to somebody either A, who's been in the business and knows kind of what the restrictions are, what it's like in that particular jurisdiction, or talk to your lawyer and ask, what is that like? I mean, anybody calling me and they're telling me it's on the west side of LA or in San Francisco, I'm going to say, you might want to really give that loan more consideration than you're giving it right now. Dan, you covered this, which is what the borrower's experience is. Is there anything you're particularly looking for?
Yeah, I mean, it depends on the loan request. If it's a value add project, rehab or construction, obviously if it's construction, it gets even deeper, but, cosmetic rehab stuff, we're just looking to see that they've done a couple deals under their belt. We want to see those go from cradle to grave. We want to see that, they don't have 2 open projects and they're coming to us for a third. They get over encumbered quick, they get over their head, and that's not the type of borrower we're looking for. Previous real estate experience is a really, really important sector where you want to spend a lot of time when you're vetting your borrower. If they don't have enough experience, typically that doesn't mean that it's a dead deal. It just means that we need to maybe reprice it, restructure the way that we make the loan. They have to have maybe a little bit more skin in the game. So there's offsetting factors, but yeah, we spend a lot of time there. If it's a construction loan, we're not only vetting the borrower, but we're also vetting the contractor, even the subs that have provided bids. And we have third parties that we bring in to help vet all of that process on the front end.
All right, and are you, I have the note here on entitlements. Are you, do you want to see entitlements up front, or at least that they've got applications ready to go?
100%. If it's a straight construction request and we're actually financing a build, we won't close until it's fully entitled. There's a enormous pitfall there for lenders that have made loans on unentitled projects. Even if they're through 1 or 2 of the municipalities, there's still a danger. So, in a rare exception, we've done those transactions, but we're intimately involved with the city at that point. But historically, again, those are situations that don't work out well. So my advice is to never make a transaction unless you're fully 100% confident that those entitlements are going to go through.
And all right. One of the concerns and things we look at, and it's one of these things that I find out generally after the lawsuit has already come in the door. We look at the background of the borrower and see from a court perspective if they've been sued and if they've sued other people. And it's something that can be done relatively inexpensively on the front end and can really give you some good ideas of who the borrower is and what the prior experience is. Dan, one of your competitors, as I mentioned to you, came to me and was considering making a loan, and there were like 130 lawsuits or something that the borrower had been involved in, and had us spend some time looking at them all. It cost some money, but the end conclusion was that they ended up making the loan once they had satisfied themselves of what they were getting into. But I've also had other lenders who have, when we found out when we got the case and did the background after litigation had already been filed, that there was all these cases that were red flags that the lender just didn't know about. So it is something that you can definitely look at, generally for a less expensive price. That'll really give you some comfort as to who you're dealing with, or give you those red flags that you can now drill down deeper and find out, hey, what is this dispute actually about? And it can let you know, because as a note here is, if the borrower sued other people, what makes you think he's not going to sue you? And if he doesn't pay other people, what makes you think he's going to pay you? Because ultimately what you're bargaining for is getting your principal and interest paid. More complexity equals more risk, or the higher the equity stack, the more room for problems. Dan, do you find that to be true with regard to loans where there are multiple levels of financing?
I do, yeah. That spans the gamut of any asset class, but especially on value add projects. And again, I'm just going to focus on that for the moment. Those are typically, you've got people who are really inexperienced, but they've surrounded themselves with some other people. So again, offsetting factors there. But the guys that understand their business, there's a lot of moving parts on these transactions, and you want to make sure that not only that you as the underwriter understand that on the front end, but that your borrower understands that. So yes, they are much more complex and significantly more risky the more moving parts. But if you've checked all the right boxes and you've gone through, again, you guys provide an enormous service for us, vetting borrowers on the back end, doing those litigation searches. Those are invaluable. Knowing that up front is half the battle. But then we also use a third party to review budgets, for instance. When we submit construction projects over, we've got a review company that does that for us. So again, those can be offset, but if you're not structured for that and you're just trying to make a transaction on your own with your own opinions, I would suggest you don't do that. Bring in more people, because the more complex the transaction, it's very likely that it's going to fail and you're going to have some trouble down the road.
All right, thanks, Dan. Next slide, trust but verify. A lot of the litigation that we're seeing, Dan, and this I think goes across the breadth of the direct money kind of market, is where it's a business purpose loan on paper, and then when they get to court, the borrower now wants to call this a consumer loan. What are you doing to verify that this is in fact a loan for a business purpose, as opposed to just some consumer coming in that's going to basically set a trap for you down the road?
Yeah, I mean, it's disclosed. Disclose. So you have the borrower on multiple parts of our underwriting, and then prior to signing documents, we're having them acknowledge consistently over and over that it is not a consumer purpose loan. The application that we're now working with also is another great tool that we use. And then beyond that, again, when we send our transactional order for documents over to whoever's doing the documents, typically Garasi, there's another layer of investigation there as well. So we're putting as many eyes on it as we can and disclosing as often as we can.
And you're getting declarations or the equivalent as to what their actual residential address is, correct?
That is correct.
All right. And are you verifying that?
We do internally, and so we've got a team at our office that, so again, it's not just one person verifying this. We've got a team of people that are responsible for certain parts of the transaction, through beginning processing all the way into underwriting and then final approval before we go to docs.
Now, one thing I know you and I have talked about in the past, and I've seen it from one of your competitors, which was a good thing, is on, especially on loans that are brokered, that are coming in with an appraisal that you didn't, the lender did not order or did not authorize. It's an appraisal that's just kind of coming in, and you really don't know who did it, what the comps are, et cetera. Do you have a process for verifying the accuracy of the appraisal?
Yeah, we do. We have our preferred appraisers that, so if it's, let's assume it's a brokered transaction and it comes in with an appraisal already done. It doesn't mean that we won't use that appraisal. What it does mean, though, is it's going to have a second opinion. So we send that report over to our preferred appraiser, depending on what geographical area it is, and we have that person do a second review of it, which costs the borrower money up front, but it protects us. So if there's a delta or a big gap, some anomaly that wasn't noticed on that first appraisal, it's uncovered at that point. So, but we do not ever allow an appraisal to come in without it being reviewed, and we rely on that. We always have it reviewed to get a second opinion.
All right, thanks, Dan. Next slide is really the importance of not just putting everything in writing, but having it in accessible fashion for ease of use and the use of certain terms. Mr. Dan and your company, you are really good. We were talking before the deposition or before the webinar, when one of your loans comes into our office because something has happened, one of the nice things about dealing with Dan is that we get immediate access to the file. Dan's organization is such, with the way he does things, that within 15, 20 minutes of, say, some notice coming in from the borrower, my office has that file, and it isn't coming in dribs and drabs over, say 6 hours, document by document, but it's basically just either sent over in a PDF, depending on the size, or uploaded onto Dropbox or one of the other storage sites. Dan, I can just tell you from a lawyer's perspective, that is huge. That gives us, really a head start in terms of being able to go to court, because we have all the documents, we have them all organized, and they all make sense. What specifically are you guys doing that gives you that capability that I recognize on the back end?
Yeah, it's a great question. And to unpack that, this is a learned behavior through trial and error. And I've been doing this long enough to have streamlined a process that's taken decades to get to here. So one of the things that again, what we really focus on is everything is in writing. We spend a lot of time on the front end making sure that the borrower is constantly agreeing and complying with everything that we're asking. So, and then all of that data, all of those emails, all that correspondence is saved on our server in the event that we need to use that and access that down the road. So that's been a streamlined process in our company that's just evolved over time. And again, it's like you said, you're the recipient of that information. It wasn't always this way. I mean, technology has advanced to a point now where that makes it a lot easier now, where that didn't exist just 10 years ago. But we do have, our staff is trained that way. Everybody we talk to, every borrower we speak with, every appraiser, every broker, it doesn't just stop with the borrower, it's everybody. And we put all of those communications into a file to where it's easily accessible by our attorney if necessary.
And as I was telling you, Dan had a case with a borrower that the deal kind of went sideways, and we got a notice, say on a Thursday, that required an appearance out in Palm Springs, which is, about a 2-hour drive from where Gerasi Law Firm is in Irvine. And the real nice thing is that it came up, Dan's office sent over the documents, we had them. We essentially had a good 4 hours in the afternoon before we had to show up in court to prepare our papers, to familiarize ourselves with the case, so that I was in the car at 5:30 the next morning heading out to Palm Springs, and I knew what the case was about. I knew what arguments I needed to make. I knew everything that was really going on, and I wound up encountering a borrower's counsel who was disorganized, didn't know what the case was about, didn't have anywhere near the information and emails that were attached to our documents. And ultimately, the restraining order the borrower was seeking against Dan's foreclosure was denied simply because Dan's efforts and his organization got us that ammunition that we could take to court. I mean, I can go to court with a gun, but if I don't have any ammo, it does not make any difference. And you really do make sure that your professionals are armed when they go to court, and it's really appreciated. The last thing on the list here is words to avoid. And generally, a borrower and a lender are not in any type of fiduciary relationship. You don't owe them a fiduciary duty. You basically are, it's a debtor-creditor relationship, and you can essentially act to protect yourself without considering the borrower. The problem is on some lending structures, particularly with regard to a profit participation on the back end, words like JV or JV loan, which are common parlance in the industry, end up being horrible in emails. And Dan, you've had your experience with that, and it's words have meaning. One of the things you want to not use in your communications with the borrower is anything which indicates that you have any relationship other than debtor and creditor. So the key here, and Dan, you can tell me if you agree with it or not, is, start with the end in mind. If you're looking to get paid, do your underwriting, do all your work on the front end, and that generally avoids the problems on the back end. Would you agree with me?
100%. That's the only way we look at transactions. Is it's all front end.
All right. Now, even if, no matter how well you've done your work, no matter how well you've underwritten this loan, problems always come up because there are unanticipated issues. And these are the triggering events that we generally see that end up leading to the courthouse. And obviously, default is one of them, a failure to make a payment. The borrower reaches out to you and says, hey, I'm having problems. Or third, you get a letter from a lawyer or something to indicate that the lawyer has kind of lawyered up, hired a lawyer. People are getting involved and things are getting a little contesting. Here are a list of some of the things that we're seeing in terms of things that are leading to the courthouse. And they are, missed or late payments, typical. You have a notice of default by a junior lien holder. The borrower isn't paying the contractor or subcontractors, and you got mechanics liens. It's been a lapse of insurance or a property tax default. Other things we see and is going through is that the borrower reaches out and talks to you about problems that are coming with the loan. Dan, how do you usually address these issues when the borrower reaches out to you?
Yeah, this is probably one of the, in the rare event that happens, it's one of the best things that can happen. If a borrower reaches out, it shows that they're willing to try to work through a problem. It's when you're chasing a borrower and they're non-responsive that's the problem. So you always want to hear a borrower out, spend time to try to provide some sort of a solution, a workout prior to going into an adversarial situation where you're going back and forth, and ultimately you file a foreclosure and then they lawyer up potentially. So we spend a lot of time with our borrowers. Look, everybody has problems. Things don't always go perfect, and we want to make sure that we're helping the best we can. But mind you, we're a fiduciary to the investor as well, which means that we don't give a ton of latitude. If there is no solution in place and they've not thought it out and there's no clear path, maybe an NOD is filed with the anticipation that, hey, we'll work through this potentially over the course of the next 4 months. We give the borrower that latitude as well. But yeah, if you're getting communication with the borrower, always try to work a solution out. That typically works out.
Yeah, and you're seeing all these things where borrowers have problems with entitlements, or a contractor is not performing, or a sale has fallen through, or that you've got complaints about your servicer. You listen out and try to solve you work the problem. Is that correct?
That's exactly right. And again, there are always a myriad of landmines that come up, especially on these value add type projects. You know, where even as we as the underwriters do the best due diligence we can, something was unseen. You know, something on a budget wasn't covered, and it's short funded now, and the borrower has to put that money in. You know, we don't do capital calls; we make them put that money in. So if there's no short term solution, again, we try to work with them the best that we can. But yeah, you always are at an advantage if the borrower's reaching out to you directly.
And the last thing, which is the other way that you know something is coming up, is the borrower lawyers up. They send you a demand letter. You get a request for the loan file from an attorney, or you get a subpoena from a third party. We've had that, Dan, where you've got a loan in place and some third party, because of some dispute, these are all red flags, signs that things are happening, and things that you got to be concerned about. It may not wind up being a major problem, but you're at least getting notice that that there could be a potential problem, and you ought to pay attention. Which gets us to the next issue, which is you underwrote the loan, now underwrite the problem. How you respond determines where you will be going. And I think, Dan, you can, as part of what your analysis was in determining what you're going to work with them, you try to figure out what's really happening as to whether or not just the borrower is a bad borrower or a bad person in terms of handling the property, whether you have bad luck or contractors, other people who are involved or in. Does asking this question or answering it affect how you treat the borrower when the problem has started to arise?
100%. It really makes a huge difference. So, like bad luck, you know, I don't know if you can quantify that. There's bad luck on lots of transactions, but if you have a bad borrower, we take a different approach. We have a different path that we take. If it's bad people, if you've got a borrower who's honest, his integrity is in check, and he just had a bad situation where he was duped by someone else, again, that's somebody we're going to try to work out a solution with. But if you've just clearly got a bad borrower, is a bad actor, didn't disclose something, then yeah, there's a completely different approach that we take at that point.
Next question that I find when I end up those cases where I get brought in response to, for example, a demand from the borrower's counsel, is trying to ascertain what the borrower really wants. And I found, and Dan, you can jump in here at any time, but my kind of look at this is that you got four things the borrower really wants, which is, one, more time. They have not, for whatever reason, they've not given themselves enough time to finish the rehab or to resell the property, to do whatever they contemplated when they took out the loan, and they just need more time. Sometimes they need more money, which, as Dan indicated, generally you're not going to get it. But if that's the issue, at least you know what the problem is, as opposed to just kind of approaching things in scattershot format. They're looking for your help. But sometimes I've gotten a couple of loans where they just want you to go away. They want you to reconvey your deed of trust and walk away. Do you see anything else that borrowers are looking for from you when the problems start to arise, Dan?
Yeah, there's probably some other items, but I'll unpack these really quick. The more time thing is that's very common. And what we do, we have short-term bridge loans. Most of our loans are a year, maybe 18 months, and we do offer extensions. You have to pay for it. You have to be current on your payments. You have to be current on your taxes. Your insurance has to be in place. So we offer those options to them, but they have to pay for it. Where there's more money in play, yeah, we don't typically don't do capital calls. We don't advance funds like that. Now, we may restructure and rewrite that transaction if it's warranted. If the budget's changed dramatically, maybe they've got an approval from the city to add another 2,000 feet to a property, and it increases the value. So those scenarios happen. We do work with the borrowers where we've rewritten that transaction. Whereas your help, we offer always to, in a way where we're almost mentoring our borrowers. A lot of the things that they encounter, we've seen. I've done over 6,000 transactions in the last 30 years, so I've seen quite a bit. So I offer advice constantly, and that's been a saving grace in a lot of ways, in that where you have a borrower who is potentially adversarial to you because you're threatening a foreclosure, and maybe an attorney gets involved. What I typically do is I try to diffuse that by giving perspective to their counsel and saying, look, we're not trying to take the property back. Here's your solutions. Here's what we recommend. And sometimes that actually bodes well, and it works out to where we work out a solution and not get into any litigation or even a foreclosure. So the last one, I've never had somebody be so bold as to tell me to go away when I have a deed of trust recorded on the property. So I've never personally experienced that.
I've seen it twice. All right, so the key here from the summary of what Dan and I just went to, number 2, is don't react blindly. Spend the time to figure out what's really going on. So before you actually make a decision on where you're going to go and what you're going to do, figure out what's going on, because as we'll see, you're better prepared to address that and make a decision that is in your short and long-term best interest. All right, once you've correctly diagnosed the problem, consider your options. One of the options Dan mentioned is an extension or a modification, a forbearance, or a foreclosure. And we'll kind of go through each of those, kind of the pluses and minuses, again, deciding what you're going to do based upon what you learned when you really got into the weeds and started drilling down into what the problem is. Dan, you want to cover extensions and modifications?
Yeah, I mean, it's, we've got kind of a high bar for that. Again, if we're going to offer a mod agreement on a transaction that's coming to maturity, typically what we do is we'll send out notification about 60 days, maybe it's actually 90 days, but then we start discussions with the borrower to find out where they're at in their project, what's their projected timeline, if it's gotten skewed from when we originally funded the transaction, and we look at a new timeline, and then we negotiate a fee for that extension. And again, there's a high bar for that. You have to be current on your payments, you have to be current on your taxes, you have to make sure your insurance is in place. If any of those 3 things aren't in place, we don't offer that extension. Typically what we'll do is we'll let it get to maturity, and we potentially file an NOD if they don't have a solution in place. The drawbacks, I haven't really looked at what you've got there. Yeah, we don't, number 2 on there, the second bullet point, if it's a bad borrower and we've recognized that through the process of that year bridge, we won't offer it. It's a non-option. It's not something that's mandatory. We offer it on the front end, but it's only an offer, and we've got provisions in place that allow us to not accept their request to extend. So we just call the note at maturity.
Second thing you can do is a forbearance, and we've had a lot of success with this in cases, because particularly with ones where the borrower is just looking for more time. They either haven't gotten the offer they want on a resale, they haven't been able to complete the construction, whatever it may be. They just want more time, and it's not a lengthy amount of time that would require a full modification or extension of the loan. They just want maybe 30 to 60, in one case 90 days. Again, the benefits of it for us, and from the litigation standpoint, is one of the conditions you get into it is you get a release and a waiver of defenses. That means that if you end up winding up in court, you've got to get out of jail free card. You can go into court, attach that to your declaration in support of your opposition to the motion for restraining order. And hey, all these things that the borrower is alleging, that you did X and you did Y, have all been released. Here is the signed agreement. And that takes the majority of the arsenal of the borrower, depletes it. It makes foreclosure a safer remedy. So if they don't perform, then you can go forward and do your foreclosure. And again, as I indicated, it's going in, it's calculated to adequately address one particular problem which the borrower may have, which is the need for time. Again, the drawbacks to it, depending on your investor base, you're already just trading time for ease of foreclosure. You may have some problems with regard to giving more time, but know that that's what you're giving. It doesn't address the bankruptcy potential. The debtor can still file for bankruptcy, but that is, in many cases, a very limited remedy, and that's really a discussion for another day. But just know that a forbearance won't help you get through a potential bankruptcy, and it does, to a certain extent, kick the can down the road. And the last option that you have here, once you've figured out what's going on, is foreclosure. And in California is a state where you can, what's known as non-judicially foreclose. You don't have to go to court and get a foreclosure judgment. It starts your 120-day clock running from notice of default to sale, it applies a significant amount of pressure to the borrower. And most borrowers who are what I call bad borrowers, or Dan refers to as bad borrowers, which are really just people who are looking to take advantage of you, they're unlikely to spend the money on counsel to really get things going early on. So it gives you a little bit of time, and it definitely improves your negotiating position. The drawbacks is, again, as indicated, it's essentially a declaration of war. You have drawn the line in the sand and said this far and no further. Doesn't leave a lot of room for negotiations, and a lot can happen until the time of sale, the 120 days. So the point here is weigh your options. Consider all your options before you pull the trigger of foreclosure. Foreclosure, as indicated, one of the problems with it is you have essentially fired that warning shot. You've taken a firm position, and that may not be the position that you want to take. So the next section we're going to talk about is how to pull that trigger safely, minimizing your costs. And the 2 points I have here are doing your homework and having a plan. Doing your homework first. I'll just speak for me, and Dan, you can tell me if you agree. Engage counsel early. When you've decided to foreclose, let your attorney know that you're foreclosing. It may come to nothing, but at least if they know that it's on the calendar, they know when things are going to be coming in, and they can arrange their schedule accordingly. So when you're not spending a lot of money, you're not having an in-depth conference. All you're really doing is just letting them know, hey, we've got this loan, we've had some problems with it, we're filing an NOD, recording an NOD, and from that point on, they at least know that something may be coming down the road. Dan, generally, do you get counsel involved early on your foreclosures?
It really depends, Paul. We've, unfortunately been through quite a few over the course of 3 decades, but I do get you guys involved early on the ones I know will be problematic, because again, we see the warning signs, we see the triggers that we've seen on others before. But if it's just something that's a common foreclosure, maybe you've spoken with the borrower and they feel, you don't feel like there's a threat there. I don't overly panic there, but I think that for anybody who's newer into the business, who doesn't have a whole lot of this experience, absolutely engage counsel early. It's always the best practice.
All right, and then a couple things. The rest of them are really just the mechanics of foreclosure. Dan, you want to address that briefly in terms of what do you do to ensure that you're not going to have mechanical problems with your foreclosure documents?
Are you talking about, well, I'm looking at your second bullet point. You've got, confirm your servicer knows what they're doing. Is that where you're at now?
Yeah, that's what I'm at now.
So we service our own transactions. So I rely on myself for that. If we outsource any servicing, it's very rare that we do. It's always going to be someone who we've worked with before. There's a couple of servicers in the industry that are, very, very reputable. But yes, confirm they know what they're doing. That's always the best practice. I don't know beyond that what the question you were asking is, but we service our own loans.
No. And with regard to defaults, what's your process for making sure that the amounts are correct, that you've gotten everything in there, including your interest, your attorney's fees, whatever else you may have, just so you don't have to go back later and either amend or have an issue at the foreclosure as to what actually is what's currently in default, the default amount?
Yeah, great question. So even though we service our own transactions, we are not actively running points on the foreclosure. We actually hire a third-party trustee to handle that for us. Somebody we've used. They've been in the business for a long, long time. It's a company that you know as well, Paul. But we match so we'll run a demand. We'll send that over. We'll send all of the necessary file paperwork over to the trustee that they need. And if there's any discrepancies, they're typically caught at that point before the actual NOD is recorded. So that's the best practice there is there, again, there's our own servicing team and then matched up with the service or with the trustee at that point who knows what they're looking at.
And after you figure out, make sure that everything is set, you want to make sure you have a plan for a disposition of the collateral. If you have a foreclosure where where you know that there's going to be bidders, that the property is going to be sold at the foreclosure sale, that's obviously less of an issue. You've already done your homework. You're already ensuring that you're going to be paid off in full. But in a lot of cases, you're going to be foreclosing and you're going to be credit bidding, and that property is going to be coming into your REO. What's important is having a plan for what you're going to do, because that's going to really affect whether or not you actually want to go through with the foreclosure, because there could be problems. And I've kind of listed some of the ones that I've seen and working with clients over the past couple of years is, if you got a senior lien on the property, what's your plan for that? They're just not going to go away. You're going to have to figure out how to pay them off or keep them paid while you continue to try to sell the property and get them paid off in an escrow. And, how are you going to sell the property? Do you have a broker lined up? I mean, Dan, when you end up credit bidding on a property, do you already have a broker in place who's going to turn around and resell that property?
Yeah, we typically have 3 in place. By that point, we've already had the appraisal done, and we spend a lot of the time, even before we file the NOD, we're already in reactive mode planning for that, getting that property back. And I can speak a little bit. We are only a senior lender. We don't do junior loans, but historically, again, when there are junior lenders involved, when we file a foreclosure, that's usually a good thing. Most of the time, in order to protect, they'll either file their own foreclosure and then advance to you those monthly payments until the property reverts back to them, or they do a workout with the borrower somehow where they partner with them and payments resume. So those are all good things. I can't speak for junior lenders being in that position because I don't make junior loans. But yes, as far as planning ahead, Paul, it's super important. We do that immediately. When we know there's a problem, that's the first thing we start looking at is the value, where we're at with the budget, if it's a construction loan or a rehab, and we're already looking at what's our plan. And we build that out over the course of the foreclosure period.
And so now the fourth key that we have today, kind of summarizing what we've gone through, is if you do not like any of the answers that you've come up with regard to what you're going to do with the collateral or how you're going to conduct the foreclosure, then you want to go back and take a look and reconsider your options. You may not want to foreclose. You may want to do an extension or a modification, or you may want to do a forbearance. This is a fluid process. So if you come down and you've got concerns, you may need to go back up to the beginning of the analysis and start looking and deciding whether or not you want to actually continue and allow the foreclosure to go forward. All right, now you have actually decided on a foreclosure. You've decided that's your best option, and you you've sent out your NOD. You maybe even gotten to the point where you're sending out your notice of sale, and you start getting borrower pushback and, in particular, threats of litigation. Dan, I can say just on some of the loans I've handled for you, and most of the loans I see, you end up getting the letter from opposing counsel, basically calling you all kinds of names and saying you've done horrible things, because they feel like it's either appropriate or that it will be less expensive if they can back the lender off with a demand letter. When you get one of these demand letters and you get some borrower pushback on a foreclosure, what do you normally do?
I call Paul Sievers. That's what we do.
Other than that.
In some cases, look, it's case by case. Sometimes we'll pick up the phone and we'll call that attorney. And it's, again, you can diffuse things sometimes. And again, I wouldn't recommend doing that unless you've got some experience in the industry, because sometimes that'll bite you in the butt, as Paul will say. Whatever you say can be used against you. But, I've been through enough of these where I can pick the phone up and have an intelligent conversation with opposing counsel and know right out of the gate if this is one that I need to get Paul involved in right away. But that's typically the thing. We get Paul involved immediately if we get a letter, and then it's hands off at that point. We let the attorneys do their job. And that's, again, we're instructing Paul, and we collaborate with Paul all the way through. Because we are representing our investors. And again, we've got experience in knowing which way to go on a lot of these. But sometimes you can head things off the pass. A simple phone call, Paul. I don't know if I'm overspeaking or overstepping, but again,
no.
I don't always get involved with the attorneys until I need to.
Yeah, and that's and again, that's an element of your experience in the industry, Dan, as to kind of trying to read the tea leaves and decide where things are going. But for most people, if you don't have Dan's experience, you want to get counsel involved, because even if it's, as the note here is, you can pay them now or you can pay them later. Yes, it costs something to get them involved, but if you wait until the last minute, until on the morning of foreclosure or the day before foreclosure, you get a notice that they're going in for a temporary restraining order, now all of a sudden you have to pay some real money. So Dan's point is absolutely well taken. If you can diffuse the situation, that is obviously the best remedy. Which gets to this, which is keep your lines of communication open. Dan is calling the attorney or calling the borrower, or the borrower or the attorney is calling Dan, and Dan is looking at trying to figure out what the borrower really wants, what the borrower really needs, and what you can do about it. Is that right, Dan?
That's correct. And you'll usually know within 2 or 3 sentences whether or not it needs to go to counsel. If you've got a hostile attorney and a hostile borrower, at that point, there's no point in trying to diffuse the situation because you already know where it's headed. So, again, point taken, Paul. Look, most of the time, I would always recommend everybody contact counsel immediately at this point, because again, if it's hostile, it's going to go there anyway. So you might as well just move it to legal at that point.
And the point there, go back to key 3, is if you find out that the borrower really just wants more time or is willing to pay some additional money for a loan extension, then provided they meet all your conditions, you'd go back and you'd consider either a forbearance or a loan extension, would you not?
Yeah, 100%, absolutely.
All right. From the lawyer's perspective, you need as the borrower, as the lender, to work with your counsel and figure out, as things heat up, where are you going to actually defend this case? I mean, do you have the basis to beat a temporary restraining order, or are you going to fight it out on some other basis or some other line of defense? You don't necessarily have to fight every single battle. You just need to win the last one. And working with your attorney allows you to figure out where the best place to fight is and where the most likely chance are of winning. And I've got a couple of the basic, what I will call battle phase lines identified, which is, a TRO, a temporary restraining order. You can fight that, or you can let that pass. In California, the next step would be a hearing on what's known as a preliminary injunction. That allows you to get do a little discovery, maybe get some more information, and you can have your major battle there. You can fight it off by challenging the debtor's complaint, or you can move on to a motion for summary judgment. From the lawyer's perspective, I know when Dan comes in, my goal is to get Dan or any other lender out of the litigation as fast as possible in the most economic way possible. It just depends on the particular facts of the case. Once you get notice that a lawsuit or a bankruptcy has been filed, you need to give actual notice to your lawyer immediately. And usually in California, it happens the day before the hearing. You have to get a phone call or an email from the borrower's counsel by 10 a.m. If you call your lawyer ahead of time, when things start heating up, the lawyer can tell the staff to be on the lookout, and you want your staff to be on the lookout for anything that comes over, either in an email, a telephone call, or regular mail, or from a messenger. You want to get that into the hands of a decision maker and get it into the hands of counsel as soon as possible. When you call your lawyer, one of the typical things is you call them on the general line. Make sure you're talking to somebody who knows what they're doing. You don't want to just give information, we got this coming over, because every minute counts. You want to give your lawyer enough time to put a case together. If they have to go into court the next day, you want to make sure they're adequately armed. And if they're not, it's usually a function of time, and you want to get it to them as early in the day as possible, because they're going to have to set everything aside and address your problem, which is what they're in the business for. But you want to help them out and give them as much information. If you're sending something by email, ask for a confirmation, because a lot of times if you're not getting a confirmation, it's sitting in someone's Outlook inbox, and it may not be looked at, if at all, that day. And you want to make sure that you're actually putting this in the hands of someone who can do what you need to get done. From your own perspective, make yourself available. The one thing that's nice about the few times I've worked with Dan is Dan's always got his cell phone. I can always call. If I've got a question after I reviewed the documents, I can call Dan and ask for a clarification. If Dan's not available, he'll send me a text saying, hey, I'm going to call you back in 15 minutes. Just know that your lawyer is going to be needing to talk to you that day. If there are questions, specific questions like the loan amount, what's due, etc., make sure those people are available. They aren't taken off early in the day, that they're there to sign declarations and do what they need to do. If you aren't self-servicing like Dan is, you're using a servicer, make sure your servicer is available. Call them, let them know. You want to make it as easy as possible for the lawyer to put the information together. At the end of the day, it'll save you probably 10 to 20% in terms of the legal fees fighting off something, if everybody's in place and available to handle things. So key number 5, develop a plan and implement it. Once you've decided to foreclose, if you go into foreclosure, you get blowback or a letter from counsel and it ripens into litigation, figure out, work with your lawyer, figure out what the plan is and implement it, and stick to the plan. Sometimes you got to change things, but for the most part, you want to stay in there. Dan, I think we're just about at our noon deadline, and we got a little bit of a late start. Apologize for the technical issues, but I'm going to turn it over right now to Alicia Carter, who works in our marketing team, and so we're not going to be able to get to questions. We do have your questions, and we will respond to them, and Alicia will explain that. Dan, thank you very much. Thank you all for listening in on this. Alicia, take it over.
Hi, everybody. Just real quick, you could look up on the screen. There is the contact info there for Paul and for Dan if you would like to reach out to either of them. Again, if you would like a copy of these slides, you can email David here on our marketing team. His email is up on the screen. It's just d.basin@jurassiellp.com. He'll be more than happy to send the slide deck over to you. And then also, as Paul said, we don't have time for the questions, but we do see all the ones that have been submitted. We're going to have Dan and Paul get together and review those questions, and then David and I will make sure to send out the answers to everyone who attended this webinar today, hopefully by the end of the week. So check your emails for that, and we'll make sure to get that info out to you guys. And then just real quick, a couple slides. We just wanted to acknowledge our partners, AAPL, the American Association of Private Lenders. We do have a conference that is coming up, our conference called Activate, and AAPL will be having a Certified Fund Manager breakout session the day before our conference starts in Los Angeles at the Sofitel Hotel. If you would like to sign up for this and you are a member, you can click on that link there or type in that link or visit aaplonline.com and you can register. Or if you're not a member, you can also find all the information on the slide to become a member if you are interested in going to that CFM session. There is a separate registration required that is through the American Association of Private Lenders as well. And then lastly, real quick, upcoming events. So we do have our Activate conference. It'll be May 9th through the 11th in Beverly Hills at the Sofitel. The early bird pricing is available now, but it will end April 15th. So if you're looking for a deal, go ahead and register as soon as possible. If you have any questions, you can email John on our team. His contact info is on the slide, or visit our website. And then lastly, just to wrap it up, just so you guys know, our next webinars, their titles are up on the screen. So just so you are in the know of what is to come for the next quarter, real quick, we have the first one that'll be in April is 3 things that every lender should know when making a construction loan. The webinar for May will be how does the new tax code affect your fund and your investors? And then in June, the webinar topic will be working with foreign investors and borrowers. So be on the lookout for those topics, for the registration links, etc. But for now, thank you all so much for listening to this informative webinar, listening to me ramble on, and we will send you those questions to your emails. And thanks again, Dan. All right, bye.